Yair Rodriguez. When I say he is overhyped, I'm talking about with how much people rate this guy in terms of his overall ability. He is a great striker. He is so unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to throw, whether it's going to be a bicycle kick or some like spinning combination into a low leg kick. Great. But when it comes to mixing up every other aspect, and I'm still going to argue jiu-jitsu in the UFC, we're not talking about his fights outside the UFC, it doesn't really look that great at times. And one thing I've noticed with Yair Rodriguez, I have to say this, in every fight, his takedown defense looks horrible. Volkanovski is not a wrestler, really. We know he can do it, but he's a striker, and the majority of the time, he's looking to outbox you on the feet. Look what he did to Max Holloway, 50-45 his A-word. But against Yair Rodriguez, he turns into a Dagestani grappler, taking him down 7 times. And I'm not just saying, oh, it's Volkanovski, so that's bad. It's no, not just that. Jeremy Stephens. And I know you're not going to like it if you like Yair, and I do because his striking's great. But when you are getting held down by guys like Jeremy Stephens, who is a striker, that becomes worrying. Very worrying. And the point that he can't get up. One thing he also does is he either jumps through a guillotine to try and choke you, or if you get him down, he's always looking to go for a triangle choke. And a lot of people can read it. Yes, he did it to Josh Emmett. But one thing I will say against Josh Emmett is he's a defensive wrestler. He never uses his wrestling. So the one time he does in recent years, he ends up getting submitted because he's not like using it in the UFC. Yeah, you can train it, but if you're not drilling it in the cage, you might make mistakes. And he did. And Max Holloway, for example, taking him down. Max Holloway's not a wrestler. The last time I saw him get like bullied in wrestling was against Conor McGregor. He was trying to bully him with the wrestling. And it actually worked back in the day. So Yair Rodriguez's cardio, his wrestling, takedown defense, it's just not that great. And his jiu-jitsu as well, it looked good against Josh Emmett, but apart from that, we never really see it. And plus, Frankie Edgar as well, he did the same thing he did in the Brian Ortega fight. Jumping for a guillotine when they're going for the takedown, and it's like he never looks to defend the takedowns, and that ends up with him getting tired because you're using all that lactic acid and then putting yourself in a bad position. And he has also got, like, I don't know if it's bad scar tissue, but he bleeds and swells very easily. So you'll notice that in a lot of his fights. He takes a lot of visual damage on the ground, and that's just something that's unfortunate. But anyways, I just had to get that off because honestly, he is a great striker. I've repeated it already. But his overall game is quite worrying. And especially if it's not a 3-round fight, he tends to struggle. Okay, he did well in that 5-round fight with Yair Rodriguez and Alex Caceres. But anyways, against Brian Ortega was able to run straight through him because Brian Ortega's kind of like flabby. He's not really muscle like built. But he's strong, he looks. And he looked bigger than Yair. Against Ilia Topuria, the reason I believe that's going to be a very hard fight for him is because he's not going to be in these positions where he can just bully him by getting under and overhooks. Like you was noticing against Yair Rodriguez, at one point I believe in like the last round before he got finished, he is underhooking Yair Rodriguez and bullying him like he's a child and pushing him into the cage. You can't do that to Ilia Topuria because Ilia Topuria, he's level changing a lot. He pressures you, but he's never keeping his head central. So if he's not keeping his head central, to force that underhook, you are going to struggle because he's actually moving around a lot. And it's not like he's coming straight forward. He's sometimes trying to cut you off. So it's not a thing where you can't just do what Yair Rodriguez did, where he's waiting to counter, clinch, and push him against the cage. Because, one, Bryce Mitchell's tried to do that. He got outstrengthed. And I would argue that Bryce Mitchell, I know we call him a jiu-jitsu guy, but his wrestling looked extremely good before the last 2 fights. And his wrestling has looked better than Brian Ortega at times. And Brian Ortega, I'll say it again, he's not a guy who will shoot in for like double legs and shoot in for single legs outside of like the cage. It's all about getting you in the clinch and then getting you down. Bryce Mitchell does the opposite. And you might be like, why am I talking about Bryce Mitchell? I'm talking about him because when Ilia Topuria fought against him, he had to deal with like a strong grappler. We all fought at that time. And Brian Ortega is not that. One thing he could do, which I've forgotten to mention, is get the submission by guillotining, because you might argue, if you are level changing, going down and up, and you lower yourself, Ortega might look to go for like a flying guillotine and jump onto the neck. That's my only concern in the fight. But one thing I worry about, look at that first round with Yair Rodriguez. If you get touched by Ilia Topuria, you're not going to survive. And Ilia Topuria is not a guy where he will rush things like Yair Rodriguez. If Yair Rodriguez hurts you, he will rush forward and try and get the finish. Ilia Topuria is the type of guy where he landed that overhand on Volk. He didn't just jump in and go all crazy. He then decided to measure the distance, then put him out like that. That's why I'm saying Yair's going to struggle heavily. I know he's taller than Ilia Topuria, and you might think I'm deriding Ilia Topuria. I'm really not. I'm just saying the things that I'm seeing when them two are fighting. For example, another thing that Brian Ortega doesn't really move his head that often. His striking defense can be quite poor at times. And if your striking defense is bad against a guy like Ilia Topuria, it's a route for disaster. And like I've said before, Brian Ortega, he looks like he's put on more weight, but I don't think he's going to weight bully him like he did Yair. Yair looks kind of like skinny in there. And Ilia Topuria, he looks like a good weight. Like, you can see the muscle on him. He's not overly muscle, but he's got more muscle on his frame than a guy like Brian Ortega. He's one of those guys, I don't know why people call him soy, I've said it before. Like, Ilia Topuria has now fought against a lot of styles. Brian Ortega, he is known for having quite a good chin, don't get me wrong. But it's a guy like, when you get hit by Topuria, you'll see him people get not TKO, they're getting knocked out cold. Also, he has got very good jiu-jitsu defense. I know we don't see him really on his back, but look at all that stuff that Ryan Hall was doing. Those Imanari rolls, the most stupid strategy, fighting like an idiot pretty much. He knows how to defend against some type of submission. So if you think Brian Ortega's going to go for a submission like a joint one like that, again, he's going to struggle. I think he's going to struggle to get him down. I believe he won't get him down in the fight. Like Brian Ortega, I've said it before, he's not really a guy who can go for like powerful takedowns in the middle. And he's going to struggle to get a guy like Ilia Topuria's back up against the cage, because Ilia Topuria doesn't ever fight with his back in the cage. He's pressuring you. The only way he's going to be able to actually get him against the cage is if Ilia Topuria overcommits, he misses a punch, and then Brian Ortega can grab like an underhook and push him against the cage, and then try and look for the neck. Or do something like what he did against Cub Swanson. That's the way you can beat a guy like him, if you're Brian Ortega. But thinking he's going to be able to bully him like he bullied Yair in them last 2 rounds is not going to happen. And I say bullied is because in the 3rd round, not the first round, he got 10-8'd almost. But in the 3rd round, you saw him just get dragged from like one side of the cage all the way to the other, and he looked like he couldn't do anything. He looked like a fish out of water. After watching that fight with Brian Ortega, recency bias might make you believe that he's got a very good chance against Ilia Topuria. I don't think he does. I think his good chance comes up against a guy like Evloev, a guy who can be caught in submissions a lot, like we saw against Mozart Evloev, and a guy like who's a predominant wrestler. Like, he'll never fight Bryce Mitchell now, I don't think, Brian Ortega, because Bryce Mitchell's a long time away from that. But a fighter like that would be a good matchup for him. He needs matchups where people are going to shoot on him, or who he's bigger than, or he can put up against the cage. And they're the type of fights that he could win. Because, like, we saw the fight with Frankie Edgar and Brian Ortega. He was able to knock him down, and you've got to remember, Frankie Edgar's quite small. Like, he shouldn't even be fighting in that division. He needs to be in the bantamweight only. And another theory I have to why Brian Ortega looks like he has a really good chin as well is because he hasn't been hit extremely hard. Like, against Yair Rodriguez, he did. But if you look at guys like Volkanovski, yes, he can knock people down, but he takes like combinations. He's not like a one-punch knockout artist. Ilia Topuria is. And we've been missing that in the featherweight division for a long time. A guy who's just known, or like a guy who's just got that one-punch power. Like he does. Like, you have your Calvin Katars in the division who mixes up loads of combinations. But he's not a one-punch knockout artist, and that's why I think Ilia Topuria has made this division much more exciting due to the fact that he's got all of these other attributes that a lot of these fighters in the division aren't used to. Like, he was at lightweight and had to go down because obviously he's going to be too small for that weight class. Frame-wise, you don't want to end up like a Darian Wynn where you're in a weight class for something that your frame is not built for. And I think this is a perfect division for Ilia Topuria. And I think Brian Ortega, who could get a submission over him, and I say could because you've always got to factor that in because it is a fight. But in my logical opinion, I don't think he's going to be able to get this, especially after watching him in that first round, watching him fight volume strikers. He can get beaten up against a guy who's got better striking than him, and he has in fights where he comes up against boxers with better striking. Max Holloway, Volkanovski, Yair had better striking than him. You're seeing them do well in the first round. And when you mix up the takedowns as well, which Ilia Topuria will not risk in the fight. Like, he can do it, but he doesn't do it because he doesn't need to. He'd prefer to get that dopamine hit off getting the knockout. But anyways, yeah, that's what I think about that fight if it ever happens. He's probably going to have to fight Mozart Evloev because we're going to see a rematch. But if that fight happens, I just think Ilia Topuria is in a different category. He's got to be worrying about the people like your Volkanovskis. I know he's knocked him out, Max Holloway, guys like that. Not really Ortega unless he can get a submission. It's an interesting matchup, but I think he's just got to hope he gets that. Otherwise, it's just going to be a knockout incoming for Topuria. So, yeah. Thank you for watching. And I know Volkanovski fought Topuria, by the way, before you ask. But yeah, thank you for watching. Talk to you soon.